Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with jazz pianist, composer, and teacher Diane Moser. Her latest 2018 CD is Birdsongs, and it's a fascinating story that weaves Eric Dolphy into the mix. She was born and raised in Iowa and got a BA from the Empire State College in New York and an MM in jazz piano from the Manhattan School of Music. These days, she is quite busy as the musical director, pianist, and contributing composer of Diane Moser's Composers Big Band. She works on film scores and has worked in the field of musical theater for many decades, along with so much more. We talked about all of this during our interview, so please get to know her and dig this interview, my friends.
Diane, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for contacting me.
Absolutely. Let's start off with your latest album, Birdsongs. Talk to me about this album. How do you feel about it?
Oh, well, I love it. It's actually a project that's been in the making for maybe 10 years, a little less than that. I mean, we recorded it last year, but all of this music is, not all of it. There's three pieces, I should say. The rest of the music were all piano improvisations that I did at the MacDowell Colony, where every day I would record and improvise with the Birds. And then at night I would listen to those recordings and decide, you know, is this a tune? If it is, what's the shape of it, et cetera, et cetera. So everything is crafted and transcribed from those improvisations. And some of the tunes on the album, like Folk Song and When Birds Dream, those are transcriptions of my improvisations note for note. And then Hello, which is based on the Black Cap Chickadee, Dancing with the Sparrows, which is based on the Chipping Sparrow, If You'll Call Me and I'll Call You, Then I'll Call You, that's based on the Robin Song. Those three, the melodies, the harmony, although If You'll Call Me is really just a single line thing, sort of like an Ornette type tune. But those were all improvisations. So some of that, the main structure and body of those tunes are the things that I transcribed, and then, you know, then we improvise on that. And then Won't You Come Out to Play, all of that, with the exception of the improvisations at the end, all of that is a transcription that I arranged them for the trio. I do my own variations on A Hermit Thrush at Eve, which is a piece by the composer Amy Beach, who lived in the 1800s. I think she passed away in the 1940s. She's considered the first woman to have a symphony played in America, and she was a staunch supporter of the MacDowell Colony. She was really good friends with Edward and Marion, and after Edward died, soon after they established the colony, and Amy Beach was like wildly popular. I mean, there were Amy Beach clubs, just like there were Edward MacDowell music clubs. There were Amy Beach music clubs. Every time she toured, she always gave a percentage of her royalties, her touring, to the MacDowell Colony. So A Hermit Thrush at Eve is her transcriptions of hermit thrush calls, and then her arrangements of those, and she wrote that at MacDowell. A piece that I commissioned by one of my graduate students called The Uncommon Loon, which is really about the day in the life of a loon, and he's from Minnesota, so he chose the state bird of Minnesota, which is the common loon. And the very first track on the CD is called Birdsongs for Eric, and that's a piece that I was commissioned to do in 2014 for the Eric Dolphy Freedom of Sound Festival. And for that one, I really researched all of the birds that were in Eric Dolphy's neighborhood in Los Angeles, and, you know, then looked through all of his solos to see if I could find the bird songs of the birds that I researched in his solos. And it's everywhere. In all of his solos, especially the flute solos. It's everywhere. So,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was really fun. It took me months and months to do that, and I didn't end up using all of the birds, but it was, you have no idea. I would be listening to one of his tracks and I'd go, oh, there's a such and such, you know, and, and I write it down in my notes, you know, heard that one. because he did this interview in the 60s for Downbeat and said that, he played with the birds in his backyard. His mom and dad built him a shed in the back so he could literally shed.
Wow.
Kind of funny. I don't know if you knew that, but they built him this shed so he could practice. And then he started inviting all of the people that he was meeting over to play. And they just, there's a recording that was just released of a homemade recording of one of those sessions. And it's a new, just in this past maybe 6 months, maybe a year of those guys jamming in his shed. And there's a painting of him playing the saxophone with birds or playing the flute with birds. I forget which one. I think might be one of each. And then there's an interview with his parents after he passed away where they talk about, he loved to play in the backyard. He loved to play with the birds. So that's this Eric Dolphy Freedom of Sound, which is a 2-day festival. Everybody was either writing music for it in honor of Eric Dolphy or playing Eric Dolphy tunes in a new way. Like we had Russ Johnson's group Still Out to Lunch, which does all the Eric Dolphy tunes, and Henry Threadgill actually wrote a new piece for it. And so I decided since I had been working on these Birdsongs for since 2008, I decided, well, Eric Dolphy was a huge birder, so why don't I go in that direction? So that was the same. The two people who are on this latest recording, Ken Filiano on bass and Anton Denner on flute, myself, Mike Serene on drums, Marty Ehrlich also on flute, and Howard Johnson on bass clarinet. And that was the group at the Eric Dolphy Festival. So that's how
Wonderful.
that all came together. And
Cool.
it's not I've been playing these for years, but arranging them for different groups to see how it would sound, because they were originally just piano improvisations, and making sure that the Birdsongs were in there. Like a lot of people will do a project like this, but they'll actually record Birdsongs and make that a part of the recording. But I wanted the Birdsongs to speak through the music. I've arranged it for my big band. I've arranged it for my quintet. There's two of them are on recording with Mark Dresser on Simp Records called Duetto. I did those. We did that right after I came home from McDowell in 2008. So it's been it's been a long journey with it, and I'm continuing to do that. And anyway, that's the origins of all of that.
So speaking of origins, you're from Iowa. Talk to me about where you grew up and how you got involved in jazz.
Well, I grew up outside of Des Moines at that time, a small town called Ankeny, which is now a really big town. And my grandmother gave me her upright piano when I was about 5, I think. And my parents didn't want it in the living room, so they put it in my bedroom. And there was only room for this piano and all of my bed and a dresser. So every day I was playing the piano constantly. Even though I didn't know what I was doing, I was inventing my own notation, et cetera, et cetera. So fast forward to, 4th grade I started clarinet, taught myself a guitar in 6th grade, switched to bass clarinet in middle school, which I loved. But by then, I had been listening. I was a really good reader and a really good sight reader, and I had a great ear because I had started my, just playing on the piano and trying to figure out sounds in my own brand of notation when I was 5. So I developed this great ear. So somewhere along the way, I think somebody gave me a lot of sheet music from the 40s. So all of those voicings in the popular music of the 40s are jazz voicings. And I figured out that what was printed on the paper is what the symbol was above, which was, usually for guitar, sometimes for ukulele, right? Those, with the tab symbols and the chord symbols. So I kind of taught myself how to do it. somewhere around, and in junior high, I started playing in the stage band. I played piano and I played guitar, and there was another girl who did the same thing, so we would switch off. And then someone had asked, a friend of mine's mother had asked me to play her. She was a caterer, and she asked me to play a small dinner party when I was 14, I think. So I had all of these tunes, all these jazz standard lead sheets, which I, again, taught myself how to do that, played that, and then after that, I just played all the time. So any opportunity I had, and I was, I had the good fortune to have a really great music education in this small town. My middle school band director had played in the Army Jazz Band, and my high school choral director was a bass player who's still, well, I don't know if he's still playing as much, but played a lot in Des Moines. Kurt Savalstead is his name. And to be involved in lots of music, and this little side job I had in high school. I don't know if do you ever remember a pianist in the Midwest whose name is Spec Red? Does that ring a bell to you?
I've heard the name, yes.
Spec Red was like a very renowned pianist in Iowa especially. But I don't know where he was originally from. For some reason I feel like it was in Kansas City, but his bass player was from Kansas City, Clarence King. But this little restaurant, hostess type job I had, Spec Red and Clarence King played in the bar every night. And boy, Spec was this amazing jazz pianist. So every night I'm listening to him. I mean, it's really uncommon for a 15-year-old to have that kind of experience.
Yeah.
And I would talk to the bass player. He'd come and talk to me on his breaks and tell me about being in the Army with Thad Jones and all of these stories. And I'm like, wow. I mean, I was just getting a whole history of jazz from these guys. And Spec gave me some of his arrangements. And then that quickly changed over. He moved on to another spot. I think he had been there for about 3 or 4 years. That's what it used to be in the 70s, right? You had a gig that you were like in one place for 10, 15 years. And so this other group came in, and I knew the bass player because I went to school with his daughter, and they let me sit in. And then after that, they just let me sit in every night that I worked after I was done with my shift. They'd let me sit in, and they would introduce me to people in Des Moines. So I was really fortunate in that way because we didn't really have, besides, a jazz band, a small group jazz ensemble, there weren't really any opportunities to play in Ankeny because it was a small town, and I was very fortunate that these people thought I had talent and started introducing me to, everybody in Des Moines, and I would sit in and play jam sessions and finally get hired for gigs. And I did come down to Kansas City once, and I can't, I've been ever since you contacted me, I've been trying to remember who that was, but it was just like a brief thing, like I went down and played and came back, and I just don't remember who that was. So those were and then I went to University of Iowa, and Iowa City had a great jazz scene. So between going back and forth between Iowa City and Des Moines and gigging, I was gigging all the time, and with lots of really, really great musicians. So it was a unique opportunity, and I still to this day am so thankful that they took me under their wing and protected me from crazy people.
Awesome.
In the bars and what have you, especially since I was underage. It was very protective, and I, minded my P's and Q's, as it were, and knew exactly what was going on. So it was a really great education.
So over your career, you're a pretty diversified, restless soul. You've been with jazz ensembles, big bands, orchestras, chamber music ensembles, dance companies, theater companies. How do all of these pieces over your career fit into your artistic/musical head?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that it's because of my view of music and of the arts in general, which is, I mean, I do think about music in terms of style and genre, but I think more about it in terms of the elements of music, which are the same elements in dance, although maybe called something different, and in visual art, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that I'm constantly exploring those elements. And then learning the styles and the genres of them, that's a different skill that you develop, you know, but getting inside the music, regardless of what style it is. So let's say, you know, we think about rhythm, in jazz, rhythm in a, you know, classical piece or a Baroque piece, you know, and taking note of the differences and the similarities in it. And that's the thing that really interests me. And then improvisation is a really huge part of my life. So doing that since I was a little kid, improvising to me means that it could be in anything. You know, you just kind of have to learn the parameters. Or if there are parameters, sometimes there aren't. So in Birdsongs, my flautist, Anton Denner, had said that, you know, a lot of the improvising that he's doing is not exactly in a jazz way, but it kind of is. But the thing that he's learned about doing this is that, you know, because of the bird songs that are in there and because of the way that I, you know, improvised with the birds and then arranged that, it's given him a new way to improvise. I felt the same way when I was playing with the birds. I'm like, oh, this is a whole new language. So it was very exciting. So I don't know if that answers your question, but each style, each type of ensemble, they all have their own language. So to me, it's like you learn the language and you look at all of the elements and you say, okay, this is what harmony means in this style, this is what it means in that style, et cetera, et cetera. And that really interests me. I always call it looking at it across the board versus looking at it just for the style or the genre.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Why do you love jazz?
I don't know. That's a good question. Since I was very young, I've always been attracted to it. I don't think I even knew that there was a word for it. I know that my dad listened to a lot of big band music. We didn't talk about it much, but he listened to a lot of big band music. Also, you know, probably the music that he listened to, a lot of it was rooted in blues and spirituals, although not in the, you know, like for example, Tennessee, Ernie Ford. You know, 16 tons, what do you get? You know, that's a minor blues, basically. A lot of, I grew up in the Methodist Church. A lot of those tunes in the hymnals, those are spirituals, and those are in a blues-type form. And so I don't think I really understood. I had that background, but I didn't understand that that's what all of that was until I played with this middle school jazz band, and that we were playing a Count Basie tune arranged by, or maybe even written by Neil Hefti. And it's in the piano part it said Phil. Well, nobody ever told me what that meant. I just figured that meant, and there were slash marks, right? So I just figured, oh, I get to just improvise here. I didn't ask the band director, so I just improvised. And I improvised in a way that went with what we had been doing. And he whirled around, he looked at me, he goes, that sounds just like Count Basie. And I said, great, who's Count Basie? So I had no idea. So I was just attracted to it. Maybe it's because of the rhythm, maybe the blues notes as we call them, maybe, but, you know, I think people tend to forget, and I talk to my students about this all the time, I think people tend to forget that jazz rhythms and harmony, melodies, it was totally pervasive in American culture, in popular music, early, you know, American musical theater, all those Richards and Rodgers tunes, et cetera, et cetera. It's all jazz harmonies. May not be the most extended and most progressive type sounding, but it's all coming from that. That's the difference of what was going on, you know, previous to that. So, and it was, it was pretty, it's in pop music, it's in rock, it's in all the stuff that we do. So maybe for me, that's what I was hearing. And that's where the danger comes from when you start separating everything out and saying, oh, that's rock, or that's this, or that's that, and not understanding where the actual roots of that music is coming from.
Let me ask you this. The beauty of being involved in jazz, from my perspective, is to get to interview and get to talk to all of these musicians, which I find the jazz community to be one of the most interesting people on the planet. And just like what you were saying about Eric Dolphy, there's so many things that you realize. There's so many interesting cats. If you could go back in time, whether it's present or it's back in time, who would you want to meet in the world of jazz? Who would fascinate you to talk to?
Oh, man, there's so many. But I would really like to have, and I almost met her, and then she died, Mary Lou Williams. She was about to do the Women in Jazz Festival in New York City what year did she die? 81, 2, 3, somewhere in there, and I knew the organizers, and I was going to meet her, and then she died, and she didn't end up performing on the festival. I know that she had played in New York, but I had never had a chance to go see her, so she would have been somebody I wish I could have known and wish I could have hung out with. Because, boy, talk about somebody who knows the whole history. Have you ever listened to that recording that she did, The History of Jazz?
No, I should.
Oh, my goodness. It's incredible. I mean, she starts, with spirituals, and she goes through everything, and she talks. She plays, and then she talks, and it's pretty amazing. So she's one of them. Count Basie I did meet, actually, at University of Iowa. I wish I had had more time to hang out with him, but it was after a gig, and we were talking. There's a big long list, but I think Mary Lou Williams would probably be on the top of that list.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. Everyone has a version of you. Your family, your friends, your fans, your students, but you know yourself best. Who do you think you are?
Oh, well, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. Who do I think? Who do you think you are?
I should say it in that soprano Jersey saying, who do you think you are? Well, but I guess more accurately, this is the thing. Everyone sees you in a certain light, and that's just the way we all roll in life. And
that's so true.
And everyone sees you in a certain role, but you're guiding your life. Who do you think you are?
Well, I think I'm a person that's open to a lot of different types of situations in life, and in terms of being a jazz musician or just being a musician and a composer. There are people that I know that only know me as a big band leader and a big band composer, and there are people that know me only as a free improviser because they don't listen to big band music, and vice versa with the big band people. They don't listen to free improv. But, I bridge all of those gaps. And my big band music, I always write in, most of the time, not every single chart, but a lot of the time I write in gestures for free improvisation. I do have straight ahead charts. And the other way around, like in the Birdsong music, there's structured improv, there's free improv. So I see myself as a person who can go between all of these different types of music and art and life situations and get to know people and flow with it. And I'm constantly looking for more of that and then adding it into what it is that I do. Whatever that could be, that changes constantly. Although I will say that jazz and classical music, especially for the piano, are probably the two cornerstones for me. But adding in all kinds of other life experiences, soundscape type experiences, all of that. So that's how, that's a good question that you asked. I'll give you an example. We recently did a big band performance for one of our members who can no longer play with us due to health reasons. And we did it up by where he lives, which is north of Montclair. It's in the Hudson Valley in New York. Ed Hickus, brilliant saxophonist, is who we paid tribute to, and we did all of his music and one tune that he recorded with Thad Jones. So he recorded a lot with them. We just did one. We did Central Park North. And he told me afterwards that his family members came, and this relates to the question you asked, and they always just knew him as, oh yeah, Ed's on tour playing the saxophone. And they were asking him all these questions afterwards, like, did you write all the notes for that, for what they played? Did you write all of those parts? That they had no idea. They just knew him as Ed. He plays the saxophone. He's on tour with Thad Jones right now. I mean, this would have been way back. More recently, Liza Minnelli. And that's all I knew. But and that was like my whole goal was so that his family could see what he's written, what he's composed. And it just blew their minds. So I think that's the same for me. There's a lot of stuff that I do, and I know a lot of people in a lot of different circles of life, and sometimes those circles come together, and we have little subsets, and sometimes they don't. I do not know what it would be like to only do one thing. I have no idea what that would be like. I do know people who do that, but that would not be me.
I think that's a great way to wrap up that answer and this interview. Diane, thank you for taking some time out and opening up about your latest album. It was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Iowa, Kansas City, and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Diane for her cool and all of that great music. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.